Hi everyone, I've got a guide here for playing Two-Handed Fury or Slam spec. Now, personally I love playing Slam. I've always tried to rotate it into raiding. Now, we've enjoyed the dual-wield Fury speedrunning meta, but with the release of Phase 6, I think the pace of the game has changed a little bit and people are looking for new challenges. Certainly in Naxxramas there are a number of new weapons that are incredibly powerful that would allow you to push this spec to its potential, and I think the challenge of having something fun is really engaging, and I enjoy it, at least anyway. But another thing to think about is that it is almost certain that we're going to be going into the Dark Portal. Now, early on, Arms is the dominant DPS spec for warriors, so if you're thinking of staying as playing a warrior, you might want to consider trying it out now, seeing if you actually enjoy that rotation. So then I guess the question is, what is Slam? Well, as an ability, it's incredible damage per rage, but its compromise is that it has a cast time that we can reduce with talents, but also that it resets the weapon's swing timer when the hit lands. This is important for understanding when to use Slam in the rotation. Now, one of the other details about Slam is in its damage calculation. You see, Slam has a attack power contribution, that it has a coefficient that relates to weapon speed. Now, unlike Whirlwind, which uses a fixed weapon speed, Slam itself relies on the actual weapon speed that you have equipped. What this means is that the slower the weapon, the greater the attack power contribution. And why does that matter? Well, world buffs, attack power and crit, are the two stats that we're able to push the hardest using world buffs. So by exploiting this, you're getting much better scaling. I would say and recommend that you should go for a weapon with 3.5 speed or above, ideally from this list. Now, looking at the talent tree, we've got the standard tree here, and I will leave a link to this in the description below. But there's a number of areas here that are personalized for me and you might want to change. So I value improved overpower massively. For me, it's a tool to recuperate loss. If I've just dodged, I want to have a tool that can give me something back in return, and giving this the maximum chance to do the best damage possible is worth a lot to me. Anger management gives you one rage every 3 seconds, but personally I have no problems with sustaining rage. Now, the other thing here is improved demoralizing shout and unbridled wrath. So unbridled wrath in theory would give you 4 rage in 10 consecutive hits on average, which is pretty underwhelming considering a single white hit might give you 70 to 80 rage. Whereas for me, Demo Shout is something that I use inside, outside of raids, even if you have main tanks that are supposed to be using that talent anyway. It's just a quality of life thing. Now, in this next group, one of the things is Piercing Howl, and Piercing Howl is just this one-point wonder. You know, if you've PvP'd as Arms, you would miss this talent immensely, and it is insanely useful. The quality of life it brings, the utility, like dungeons, solo play, raids, it really has its place in all of them, and the sacrifice of the 5% increase to Battle Shout attack power I think is completely justified. And not only that, if you're planning on playing this spec, it just adds more utility to what you're bringing to the raid. So I definitely think it's just not a talent to skip out on. The next is Improved Cleave. Now, this talent was constantly misunderstood in vanilla, and it's sad to see that it still is now. The 120% increase only applies to the bonus damage of the ability, meaning that you end up with 110 bonus damage on the cleave. This is pretty much always a DPS loss in any circumstance where you're solo, with the exception that you're able to always have another warrior there battle shouting you to give you the AP that you lost. I would not recommend this talent, but if you are min-maxing, you might want it. Okay, so starting with the DPS rotations, let's look at the single target rotation. So this should be quite obvious to you, but Bloodthirst and Whirlwind should always be on cooldown. These are your top priorities, with Bloodthirst being the most important. Now, I've highlighted here the standard rotation. You should be able to consistently achieve this when world buffed. You perform a Bloodthirst, a Whirlwind, you let your white swing land, and then you immediately follow up with 2 slams, and repeat. Now in practice, because Bloodthirst and Whirlwind have different cooldowns, they'll tend to fall out of sync, so you'll alternate between either casting one or the other, or both in a given rotation. The next sequence is for high rage situations, when you're in an alternative cooldown and either Bloodthirst or Whirlwind are not available for that given rotation. You should have the time and the rage to be able to spend 3 slam casts. The next sequence is the alternative high rage situation. The only difference between this and the last is that instead of casting a final slam, you cue Heroic Strike. The advantage here is that you get slightly better clipping on your next sequence. When paired with a cancel macro for Heroic Strike and the improved Heroic Strike talent, this is technically the most efficient of the 2 high rage rotations. But it's most preferable for Horde and a little bit tricky in practice to pull off as Alliance. Now, one thing I would really recommend is that you use Warcraft logs to review your ability to execute these rotations. You can go to Warcraft logs, find a fight, a nice one like Patchwork or Lotheb, select your character, and click Timelines and Casts, and you'll get a nice timeline for what you were doing. And this can be a great eye-opener to see whether or not you're achieving the rotation that you should. Okay, so let's look at this rotation in practice. Now, I have a custom UI, so I've brought up an image just to highlight a few of the things, just in case it's confusing. It is really important that you have a weapon swing timer. There's a whole bunch of UI mods out there, but I will link my weak aura in the description below. All I'm doing is keeping Bloodthirst and Whirlwind on cooldown, I'm waiting for my white hit to land, and then I'm chaining Slam. The only real exception to this is in the event of a dodge. Now, the most important thing to remember with a dodge, and you'll see one coming up in a second, is that I'll switch stance, cast Overpower, but I will switch back before my white hit lands. That way, I still have enough rage to maintain the rotation. If I don't do this, then I'll actually remove all that rage by switching stance. In a fight that has high mobility, the most important thing here is that you're casting Slam as close to the center of the monster as possible. So you can see here I'm kind of stutter stepping into the boss, trying to be as close as possible such that if he moves while I'm casting Slam, at least within that 1 second window, he'll still be within range. Now, this doesn't always work out, but it's good to try it. The only other thing you can really do here, if you're on Horde, is use Hamstring in the in-between moments. Alternatively, as Alliance, use Heroic Strike. Now, for the multi-target rotation, when there's multiple targets, 2 or more, Cleave and Whirlwind become more damage per rage than Bloodthirst. So ideally what you want to do is bank enough rage in order to be able to chain cast these abilities. And only if you've got excess rage should you really be dumping that into things like Bloodthirst. I've got a clip here for you where I kind of weave between doing some single target and some cleave. I make use of one little trick where I jump using Whirlwind, which extends the range of the ability, if you're not aware of this. But again, you can see I'm chaining some slams when possible, and then switching to cleaves when I'm sure that I can get 2 targets with a single hit. You can see that you can actually generate some pretty insane burst when you're using a 2-hander going in for cleave, and this is one of the best advantages of this spec. Now, one tip I can give you is that in the Blasted Lands there are these Servants of Rezlik. Now, if you go here, they'll be standing next to floating crystals. If you sunder them up, do some damage, they'll turn immune. You can practice the rotation on these monsters while they're immune, and just get a feel for how to play. As soon as they come out of this immune phase, you can actually just hamstring, run away, and reset. So it's a really great way to practice. And with that, I hope you enjoyed the video. Two-Handed Fury is a really fun spec to play. I really love the fact that it has a very metered and slow playstyle compared to Dual-Wield Fury. It does go without saying though, and an important note if you are trying to min-max, Dual-Wield Fury scales 2 weapons instead of 1, and for that fact it will always do more DPS than Two-Handed Fury on single targets. But you do have an advantage on cleave. Ultimately, I hope you have loads of fun playing the spec, and of course looking forward to the Burning Crusade when Slam is at its strongest. I hope that you're hyped for it and ready to go. Even if in some cases the animation for doing big bonks isn't quite that great.